The calm before the crack. Most mornings in the neighborhood of Crescent Hills began the same way. Sunlight slanting over beige rooftops, sprinklers ticking to life in perfect synchrony, and the faint hum of idling engines as commuters headed off to 9-to-5s. For Marcus Reed, it was the sound of his coffee machine that signaled the start of the day, followed by a satisfying clack as he opened the deadbolt on his front door and stepped out into the warm Georgia air. Marcus liked his routines. At 38, a former Marine turned cybersecurity consultant, predictability was a comfort, not a cage. His life was simple. Wake early, jog the loop around Oakview Pond, water his succulents, then get to work remotely from his home office. The Jeep, a slightly beat-up Wrangler with a matte black finish and reinforced tires, was more than a vehicle. It was his one piece of rebellion in an otherwise curated neighborhood. He'd bought the Jeep after returning from overseas, not just for off-roading but because it reminded him of something real, something useful. It still had the military-style tow hitch and a custom lock on the back gate that required a key, not a code. The kind of thing that made HOA board members twitch. Crescent Hills wasn't exactly thrilled about Marcus or his Jeep. The neighborhood, 94% white according to the last census, wore politeness like a mask. Behind every neighborly smile was a subtle calculus. How long before he sells or we complain? The HOA, chaired by the ever-vigilant Karen Whitmore, had already politely requested he park the Jeep inside his garage. Problem was, his garage doubled as a gym. He liked seeing the Jeep in the driveway. It made him feel grounded. Maybe that's why they hated it so much. Karen lived 3 houses down. Her porch decorated year-round with seasonal wreaths and American flag bunting. Her car was a spotless white Lexus, parked at the same perfect angle every morning. She ran the HOA like a private government, clipboard always in hand, issuing violation warnings as though they were eviction notices. Marcus had received 3 already this month. One for unauthorized exterior decor, a small Black Lives Matter sticker on his front window, one for improper landscaping, his drought-resistant garden, and a third for vehicle non-compliance. That one came the same day he installed the hitch lock on the Jeep. He hadn't responded. Part of him wanted to stir the pot. Another part knew it wouldn't end there. On his walk that morning, he passed other residents on their driveways. Older couples walking dogs, moms in yoga pants corralling toddlers into SUVs. He nodded, received the usual tight-lipped smiles. One neighbor, Mr. Kessler, gave him a curt wave, eyes lingering on Marcus's hoodie that read, "Trust Black Men." When he reached the cul-de-sac where the pond loop started, he paused. There was again that feeling, like someone watching him. Not just watching, measuring. The tension had started small. First it was a missing package. Then a complaint about loud music, even though Marcus rarely played any. A child's basketball rolled into his yard and disappeared. The next week, he found tire tracks near the Jeep's hitch. He knew what this was. Crescent Hills didn't want trouble, but it didn't want him either. Not really. Not his Jeep, not his stickers, not his unapologetic presence. And definitely not the way he kept to himself but didn't shrink when confronted. That, more than anything, seemed to bother Karen. Later that day, a folded slip appeared in his mailbox. Another violation notice. HOA notice. Vehicle still non-compliant. Lock on tow hitch not in accordance with aesthetic standards. Please remove within 48 hours. Marcus turned the slip over in his hands, then let out a dry laugh. The lock, a matte black security hitch he'd installed after a briefing with a local police task force, was not just aesthetic. It was a necessity. See, what Karen didn't know and wouldn't be told, was that the Jeep wasn't just a Jeep. It was part of a larger operation, fitted with low-visibility surveillance equipment. Marcus wasn't undercover, but the vehicle had been borrowed for a pilot program tracking stolen property and illegal dumping across neighboring counties. He volunteered for tech support. Discreet parking was part of the program. He stepped outside to check the Jeep. The lock was still there, heavy and cold in his palm. But the paint on the hitch looked scratched. He scanned the street. Nothing obvious. Karen's house looked empty, her flag gently rustling. But something in his gut twisted. That was the thing about neighborhoods like Crescent Hills. Nothing ever looked wrong until it already was. Warning signs. 2 days later, Marcus woke to the sound of a leaf blower snarling like a chainsaw just outside his bedroom window. He glanced at the time, 6:42 a.m. Too early for landscaping, even by Crescent Hills' hyper-efficient standards. He pushed the curtain aside. No crew. Just Karen in her pastel pink jogging outfit, standing at the edge of his lawn with a digital decibel meter. She pointed it at the Jeep, then scribbled something on a pad. Marcus watched her for a moment, tempted to open the window and say something. But what was the point? Karen thrived on confrontation, especially when she could spin it as concern for the neighborhood. He brewed his coffee, pulled on a hoodie, and stepped outside, letting the morning sun cut through the tension building in his chest. Karen pretended not to notice him. She did a slow pivot and walked back to her house, clipboard clutched tightly to her side like a weapon. Another warning would come, he was sure. She'd already warned him verbally last week during a random inspection walk-by. Marcus, just so you know, that vehicle of yours might attract the wrong kind of attention. We try to keep things tidy here. There's a look we go for. A standard. He'd simply smiled and said, I like my Jeep just the way it is. But he'd seen her eyes narrow. That wasn't the answer she wanted. What she really meant was, your kind already attracts too much attention. The thing was, Marcus wasn't blind to how he stood out. He was a tall black man, quiet but firm, with a military bearing and a distrustful stare that made people fidget. Crescent Hills didn't know what to do with a man like him who owned property but didn't defer, who wore tactical boots with joggers and didn't engage in the usual front yard small talk. He waved at kids, but rarely got waves back from their parents. The racial dynamics here weren't overt. This wasn't some 1960s holdout. It was subtler, quieter. The kind of bias that came with faux courteous language, like aesthetic concerns or standards of decorum. The kind that showed up as extra scrutiny, vague accusations, and a collective silence when someone like Marcus was clearly being targeted. Later that afternoon, another note appeared on his door. HOA notice. Final warning. Lock and exterior modifications must be removed within 24 hours to avoid fines. It wasn't printed. It was handwritten in tight cursive, the paper creased sharply at the corners. Karen had left it herself, no doubt. Marcus set it down and walked to his Jeep. The hitch lock was intact, but something was different. The protective rubber cap on the key slot was missing, and the paint on the rear fender looked freshly scraped, like someone had leaned something against it. He crouched beside it, inspecting the lock. Someone had tried to pick it. Not professionally. More like someone impatient, maybe with a screwdriver or a pair of bolt cutters. His first thought was Karen. Not because she seemed dangerous, but because she was entitled enough to think she had the right. He checked his driveway camera footage but found nothing, which was strange. His system usually picked up any motion. He decided to recheck the logs later, but deep down he already knew. If something happened to that Jeep, it wouldn't be a random act of crime. It would be someone who felt emboldened. Someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them. Someone who believed she spoke for the rules. The next morning, Marcus drove the Jeep to a secure lot used by the city's community task force. He'd already agreed to park it there for 2 days for the surveillance pilot. It was equipped with low-visibility plate scanners and a remote Wi-Fi node, designed to collect data on illegal dumping and traffic violations in industrial zones. He didn't tell Karen or anyone else in Crescent Hills where it was going. Let them assume he'd caved. Let Karen smirk on her next walk. He wanted her to get comfortable. Back home the neighborhood felt lighter. Or maybe that was just Marcus imagining it. Still, he caught the looks. Neighbors suddenly more friendly, nodding like something had been resolved. A few even said hi for the first time in weeks. Then, that evening, while taking out the recycling, he spotted Karen walking back from the cul-de-sac, her arms crossed, face tight with disappointment. She passed him with a clipped smile but said nothing. Her eyes flicked toward his empty driveway. Something was brewing behind that silence. A few hours later, a neighbor texted Marcus a grainy cell phone photo. Karen standing next to a white tow truck parked suspiciously close to his property earlier that day. No action shot. Just a still image, snapped from behind a curtain. Thought you might want to see this. Weird timing. Marcus stared at the photo for a long time. He couldn't prove anything yet, but the pattern was clear. Someone had gone too far. And whoever they were, they thought the Jeep was unprotected. But they had no idea what it was tied to, or who was watching now. The line crossed. It was just after 6 a.m. when Marcus got the call. He was still in bed, half awake, scrolling through his email when his phone buzzed with the local task force's contact ID. "Marcus, your Jeep's gone." The voice on the other end was Officer Delaney, calm but clipped. The lot manager came in early and saw the back gate forced open. "Surveillance footage is being pulled now, but your vehicle's gone." Security said someone used bolt cutters. Marcus sat up straight. "You're kidding. Who the hell?" "We'll know soon. But the surveillance tag and GPS were still active. We're tracing it. Sit tight." The call ended. Marcus stared at his phone, adrenaline thudding in his chest. The Jeep was missing. Not from his driveway. Not from the street. From a secure police-monitored lot. Only a few people even knew it was there. He got up, pulled on his clothes with mechanical precision, and stepped outside into the dim morning. Crescent Hills was still waking up, porch lights blinking off, sprinklers hissing quietly into the manicured lawns. Birds chirped. The smell of fresh mulch hung in the air. He looked across the street and saw Karen's front door ajar. A man in a navy uniform stood by her garage, short, balding, hands stained with grease. He was unhooking something from the back of a white flatbed tow truck. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Jeep. His Jeep. It sat on the bed of the truck, rear tires locked in place, the hitch visibly bent. The matte black finish had long scratches down the side, and one of the door mirrors was cracked. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, a clipboard in hand. She didn't look surprised to see Marcus. "Morning," she said, with that same brittle smile she always wore when pretending this was normal. "I was just about to come by." Marcus didn't respond. He walked slowly across the street, heart pounding. "You towed my Jeep from a city lot?" he asked. Karen blinked. "It wasn't supposed to be there. It was listed as abandoned. We had it removed under HOA authority. I was doing my job, Marcus." "Your job?" His voice was flat now, cold. "You cut through a secured gate on city property." She frowned, still clinging to her performance. "It wasn't marked properly. And we'd given you warnings. This," she gestured to the Jeep, "this has been an ongoing issue. The lock, the way it looked, it scared some of the families." He let out a low breath, trying to keep his fists at his sides. "You stole a vehicle involved in an active police operation." Karen blinked again. The words didn't register at first. Then her mouth twitched. No one said anything about." "You weren't supposed to know, Karen." By then, a black unmarked cruiser had turned into the cul-de-sac. Officer Delaney stepped out, flanked by two uniformed cops. The moment their badges came into view, Karen's face went pale. Marcus crossed his arms and stepped back. "Ask her who gave her authorization," he said. Karen tried to speak, but her words stumbled. I was protecting community standards. I sent letters, gave him time, but he was being defiant. We have bylaws." Delaney glanced at Marcus, then at the Jeep. "This isn't about bylaws anymore. This is theft and tampering with government equipment. You're lucky we're not adding interference with a police investigation." Karen's mouth opened, then shut. She looked around, expecting neighbors to emerge and take her side. But the street was silent. Curtains moved behind windows. A few garage doors stayed half-closed. No one came out. Marcus didn't feel triumphant. He felt exhausted. He watched silently as Karen was led to the side of the cruiser for questioning. The tow truck operator, now visibly uncomfortable, muttered that Karen had paid him in cash and insisted the vehicle was abandoned and unregistered. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Did you verify that?" "She told me she was HOA president. I've worked in the area before. I didn't think." "You didn't think," Delaney muttered. Marcus stepped closer to the Jeep, inspecting the damage. The lock was gone, cleanly cut. The surveillance equipment in the back looked untouched, but he'd have to have the systems checked. The hitch would need replacing. The fender repainted. Karen was still protesting, her voice cracking with a sudden realization of what she'd actually done. "This is insane. I was trying to make things better. He made people nervous. It's a military vehicle." And there it was. The mask had slipped. This had never been about aesthetics. Not really. It had always been about control, about forcing someone like Marcus to shrink, conform, or disappear. And when he didn't, she decided to make him disappear herself. He looked back at his house. At the front lawn, the driveway, the neatly folded violation notices still sitting in the kitchen drawer. The line had been crossed. Now there would be consequences. Aftershocks. 3 days after the theft, the Jeep was back in Marcus's driveway. Scratched, dusty, but whole. A city tech team had run diagnostics on the surveillance equipment and cleared it for continued use. The official report noted community interference and unauthorized civilian removal of a vehicle tied to a municipal operation. Legal language that softened what it really was: theft, sabotage, and bigotry dressed up in bylaws. Karen hadn't been arrested, but she'd been charged. Property damage, unlawful towing, and obstruction. She'd spent a night in county lockup. The story made local news. HOA president accused of towing police-linked vehicle without authorization. Her mugshot, hair askew, lips tight, was framed on more than one local Facebook group. The community was rattled. Some residents were silent, embarrassed, or afraid to pick a side. But others began to speak. A black couple on the next block, Angela and Troy, stopped by to offer support. "We've been dealing with her nonsense for years," Angela said. "You just had the guts to push back." Others weren't so brave. One neighbor, a woman Marcus had waved to every morning for the past 2 years, suddenly avoided eye contact. Another posted anonymously on the HOA's internal message board about keeping the neighborhood free from activist surveillance. And still, the Jeep sat quietly in the driveway, like a monument to what had really happened. Marcus stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching kids ride their bikes around the cul-de-sac. The heat was thick, but the breeze was steady, rustling the trees just enough to stir the flags and banners still hanging from July 4th. His BLM window sticker had been removed during the week of the incident. Ripped, not peeled, but he'd already replaced it. This time with something bigger. "Protected by constitutional rights," it read. Right next to the Jeep. The HOA held an emergency board meeting 2 days later. Via Zoom, of course. Karen was removed as president. The vote wasn't close. She resigned from the board altogether that same night. Word was she'd lawyered up. Marcus didn't attend the meeting. He didn't need to. The damage had already been done, both to Karen's standing and to the illusion of Crescent Hills as a peaceful, colorblind utopia. The kind of place that prided itself on order and cleanliness, as if those concepts were neutral, as if they didn't come with weight. As if they hadn't always been used to push people like him out, quietly, bureaucratically, through policy and paperwork and endless complaint forms. That was the thing about racism in neighborhoods like this. Didn't come with slurs. Came with suggestions, polite corrections, petitions, anonymous notes, smiles that never reached the eyes. And sometimes came with bolt cutters and a clipboard. On Saturday morning, Marcus jogged past Karen's house. Her porch was bare now. No flag, no wreath, just a lonely potted fern that looked like it hadn't been watered in days. A for sale sign was planted firmly in the front yard. She wouldn't be the last of her kind, but she'd be a warning. As he turned the corner, He saw the old man across the street, Mr. Kessler, wave from his porch. "Morning," the man said. "Glad that mess is behind us." Marcus nodded. "Some messes leave stains." Kessler looked surprised, then simply nodded. Later that afternoon, Marcus opened his email. A new message from the interim HOA president, a woman named Danielle who'd kept her distance before but now used words like healing and moving forward. She asked if he'd be willing to join the board. He stared at the screen for a long time before closing the message. Maybe he would. Not to fix the system. Not to clean it up. But to keep eyes on it. To make sure what happened to him never happened to anyone else. Or maybe not. Maybe his presence alone, the Jeep in the driveway, the flags, the walk, the look on his face when someone told him to smile, maybe that was resistance enough. That night, as the sun set over Crescent Hills and the street lamps flickered on one by one, Marcus stood in the driveway beside the Jeep. He ran his hand along the fresh paint where the scratches had been buffed out, then looked up at the quiet street. Nothing moved. But for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel hostile. Felt watchful. And this time, he wasn't the one being watched.